Okay, next up is Varnoth, The Black Blade, book number 2, written by Lavelle Jackson. This is the second book in the series. It is 331 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here is the author's description. This Catman isn't all that cute and cuddly. Varnoth's journey through the lush fantasy world of Albattara continues. After the defeat of the Derelict's gang Vile, crime boss, Atlas Blackthorne, all seems well for the countryside. However, a horrific event occurs that forces the Shadow Panther to lead a massive group of diverse refugees as they search desperately for a safe haven. Varnoth will battle ghastly monsters and adventure on fascinating quest as he grows into one of the most powerful heroes in all the land. This time around, Varnoth is not alone. There are new and unique side characters that join the fight alongside the legendary Black Blade. Will this power be enough to when retribution knocks on Varnoth's door? Will the Shadow Panther be able to keep his people safe? An army of monsters led by a depraved, bloodthirsty tyrant will test Varnoth's bravery and skill. Will the Shadow Panther be able to prevent the slaughter of the very people he swore to protect? So there you go. That's the novel description. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is the second book in the series, and it still has a lot of the issues that I had with book one, especially in the RPG side. But my expectations for this novel were better managed, and while I tried really hard to like this story, I did. Sorry, author. Sorry, Lavelle. It was just a miss for me, and that's unfortunate. Again, I know that there are people who enjoy this novel, and feel free. If you like book one, you're going to like book two. You will. It has all the same things people enjoyed, although it's not as intense or focused plot wise. But I'll get into that. The novel starts off well enough with good action, which is great. The action is probably the highlight of the story in the series. I've never had an issue with the action whatsoever. It gets a little gory sometimes, but very well described. The main character continues to be overpowered, and rarely in any real danger of ever losing. The only aspect here that I've always kind of had with the story is that the fact that the overpowered aspect doesn't really match the RPG element. It's never really justified in the story why he's so overpowered, why he always seems to win despite whatever odds he's faced against, or if he might suddenly like almost lose, but in the RPG aspect of it, it's never really justified in those situations. Like the main character just doesn't look at the opponent's level. There's no level justification for it, or there's no real comparison of RPG characteristics. Even though you get statutes on a regular basis, there's no comparison for the information, so it doesn't really mean a lot. So again, that's what I mean by this. It's not really justified on the RPG side of things. However, I knew that going into this novel, so that wasn't as big as an issue for me this time as it was in the previous novel. And that's just because I knew about it. I knew it was going to happen. So I just kind of put in my brain, ignore that aspect of it and continue on. And it really wasn't a big issue for me. I enjoyed the nods that the author had for some of the people in the LitRPG community, whether the members or authors or friends or whatever the case is. And my favorite being, of course, John, son of Ray. I enjoyed that little nod to one of our LitRPG podcast family members. The story itself, however, continues to be action adventure, very much a slice of life story this time. There are some added town building elements. The main character helps some people, gruesomely kills some bad guys. There is no real plot here. There are some main characters, a bit of town building, some quests, fighting, and a bit of leveling, and an actiony end. I'm really going to describe this as slice of life just because in book one, the main character kind of had a goal. He shows at the beginning of that novel without a memory of who he is, and so part of his goal is figuring out why he exists, what his powers are, getting a class, and kind of figuring out the mystery of who his past self was. And that doesn't exist here. There's no real point. There's no plot in that respect. You do get a threat about midway to late in the story where there's a very, I don't want to say similar threat. From a bad group like you saw in book one. However, this new group isn't nearly as bad as the first one. And again, it kind of just serves as a mid to late opponent for the main character kind of overcome. So even in that respect, it's not really super intense until like the end of the story. Dialogue is probably one of the aspects that kind of turned me off on this story. It's sometimes kind of funny, like there are definitely funny moments, but mostly the dialogue felt stilted and kind of forced. And and sometimes it just didn't make sense in like this super brutal, gory, killer bee guild kind of world. Characters were very polarized in that they were either really, really good and spoke politely and called the main character my friend a lot for some reason, even though they might have just met him, or I've had very few interactions with them. Or they were like super evil and they cursed a lot. And those kind of the way you could tell whether somebody was going to be a good guy or bad guys was how if they cursed or were super polite. And all the characters kind of fell into these two little molds. And it was just like very diametric in that there was no middle ground. There were no complex characters. A lot of the characters are very flat. They're just evil or they're just good. And there's not a lot of depth to characters, not a lot of like complicated backstories or questioning of why people are doing these things. Even the main character was very much more on like the Dudley Do Right kind of side of things a lot of times, except for when he was getting gory and murdering bad guys. So it's like that was kind of more of a writing issue, and that the characters just weren't interesting to me. And again, that is me. It's just hard for me to connect with these particular characters, unfortunately. And so again, I tried to manage my expectations, and I ignored the overpowered issues. That was not an issue for me this time as much because I knew what I was getting into, so I accepted it. However, the other issues I just couldn't connect with the characters enough to care about them or find them interesting or be super interested in the story and like how they developed. So the story didn't really work for me, and neither did the characters, and those are just aspects I couldn't find myself enjoying. So for me, the story didn't really work. It gets a 6 out of 10 for me, but again, go check it out. Go form your own opinions. I know people have enjoyed this series, so if you liked book number 1, you're probably gonna like book number 2. It's just that I didn't, and so it was always going to be a challenge for me to get into this book, and I just didn't, unfortunately. So Varnoth the Black Blade, book number 2, gets a score of 6 out of 10.